Welcome to Out of the Blank.
Welcome to another episode of Out of the Blank podcast. I'm here, Dylan. Dylan, for everyone out there listening who might not know who you are, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi. Thanks for having me. I'm Dylan Selterman. I'm an associate teaching professor at Johns Hopkins University. I teach psychology and do a little bit of research in that area as well. I have a blog on Psych Today called The Resistance Hypothesis, and I co-host a podcast with Manny Galvan called A Bit More Complicated.
Can I ask what the resistance hypothesis is all about? What do you typically read about?
So that is about ways that we can make society better with science. And it's kind of a similar theme as the podcast, actually. There's a lot of focus on social issues and politics and ways that we can understand how people's minds work when they're thinking about important topics.
How do you think, I guess I should say, how do you think minds work when it comes to dealing with certain topics? Because it seems like everyone has their own angle of how it should be done. But I mean, besides small changes for sure, but we still can't get into a consensus or agreement. It seems like a lot of people, even with diverse opinions, you can still talk about stuff as well too, and come to a core issue of being able to solve issues. But it seems like everybody's got their own path of how to reach the final goal. But without communication, it kind of gets lost in translation.
I actually think we overestimate how people might feel differently about issues. I think my thesis is that most people agree about most things. And then there's some folks on the edges who are in extreme disagreements about a lot of different things, but that's usually not most people. So if we start from there, then we're probably going to find it much easier to understand each other and to build consensus and form coalitions about important causes.
Do you think people would probably agree more if they were actually in a room together rather than an aspect of maybe social media where it seems like most of the fighting occurs?
Yeah, I get this question a lot about social media. I'm actually not as down on social media as I think the average commentator is here. I think social media gets blamed for a lot of problems because it makes things more visible than they used to be. I think people tend to have a hard time seeing each other and communicating in person. And then they also have a hard time online for the same reasons. And generally speaking, we see a lot of the worst aspects of people's behavior online because it's all public and we get it on our phones in our pockets all day. But that stuff was always there. We just didn't see it as much.
Plus, it's easier to yell at somebody or say something rather than if you were in person and doing it. Seems like if someone started yelling at somebody in a store, it'd be like, what's this person's deal or what's this person's problem? I mean, social media, I mean, as much as I can say that you can blame it for everything, you really kind of, there's beneficial aspects to it. It's just kind of about using it to our benefit. The only issue that I have a problem with is that you don't see how me and you see each other right now. I feel like even if we disagreed on things, it's still the communicative aspect, I would say, that helps us understand and have that conversation that I think is needed. And through social media, you don't know if someone's trolling or just having fun. If they say something insane that nobody actually believes this, it's hard to tell if this person's joking or not because you don't know.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's hard to detect sarcasm online. There's a landmark study about 20 years ago when they just showed people some emails. And this is, before social media, but people were communicating through instant message and over email. And they said, can you tell if this person's being sarcastic? And they really couldn't. So I totally get what you're saying. It's more difficult to understand the emotional inflections that people have with a text only medium. And so I think in that case, you're right. We just need to know what the limitations are and what we can use in terms of other formats to communicate better.
It does get a little weird though when someone sends you something that you know they're not like joking, but they just type in LOL after it. And you're like, you just added that there because you were trying to be serious about something, but you also didn't want to ruin the friendship. So you just toss in a little LOL or emojis. Like emojis throw a monkey wrench in the whole way that we communicate. So if I was going to ask you, like communication wise, do you think that we've gotten better or do you think it's gotten a little bit worse?
Well, I don't think we were ever that good at communication.
That's true.
This is one of the things that I like to emphasize in my teaching is that these are not things that we're born understanding how to do. Humans can be very good at communicating, and we have a learning bias such that we pay attention to communication in others around us, especially older people, like slightly older kids when we're young, teenagers, and then, of course, our parents and their friends. And we pick up a lot of stuff along the way, but there's little in the way of real concrete education. It's like how some people are pushing hard for comprehensive sex ed because they know this is going to prepare kids for when they're actually dealing with this stuff later on. I would love to see that focus with something like emotional intelligence and communication because these are not skills that we're born with, but they're very, very important. So I don't think we were ever really that good at it, but I think we can be. This is why I'm an optimist. I think there's a lot of potential here for us to be really, really good communicators.
So how would you suggest, I guess, a way to be able to use it effectively or be able to, is it, would it be better education? Like you mentioned emotional intelligence, and I start thinking like what examples of emotional intelligence? Because I know some people that are like 40, but they're like man babies or in a
Yep.
sense.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep. Yeah, I think when it comes to emotional intelligence, a part of it is doing exercises that involve active listening and paraphrasing and attention checking. Did I get this right? Am I understanding you correctly? Let me see if I can paraphrase what you just told me. It's a lot of practice. It's getting your reps in. And it can be hard even for people who have known each other for long periods of time. It can be hard for even best friends or even married partners to truly communicate in a clear and active way. It takes a lot of skill and practice to build up. So whether that should be done in school necessarily, I don't have a strong opinion on. I mean, I think school is great for certain kinds of communication. I think schools are a rehearsal space for democratic norms, so that can include a lot of certain kinds of communication about how to build communities that are functioning well and thriving, and people are able to learn and relate to each other. So I think there's definitely a place for that in school, but I think it really has to happen in all areas of our lives.
Do you think possibly it's also to do with time? Like I've always mentioned that like it seems like people are have an unrealistic expectation of their time. It's probably why people like try and do so much in a short amount of time because they think there's not enough hours in the day. And it's like you actually
There
have a
aren't enough hours in the day.
that's what they say, but that's not true. You have plenty of time. It's just about budgeting it. But there's a lot of like I guess it's a difficult scenario because I also think I have ADHD, so I'm constantly doing multiple things at once. But if you boil it down to like just focusing on the things like, for instance, success has been measured by time, but also the amount of things that you do. If we talk about what it means to be successful for a lot of people, including myself, successful will be like being on a TV show at 8 a.m., then a podcast at 9, then doing a movie deal at 10, and it's like 10, 15 different things or you're out of the game. Now, I heard that from an old actor. You might remember him. His name is Jamie Kennedy. He mentioned that because everyone's like, "Where did you go?" And he was like, "Well, if you're not doing like 4 podcasts in the first 4 hours of your morning, and then all this, then you're out of the game." And it's like that is true. There is like a unrealistic expectation that you need to be doing a lot in a short amount of time.
Yeah, and it's a great question just in general. How do we think about success in a healthy way? I actually teach and do some research on the psychology of well-being and happiness. And in terms of success, if you ask me what makes a successful person, it's whether they feel a sense of contentment and peacefulness throughout the day, it's not how much you're doing, it's whether you feel generally well most of the time. And yeah, I mean, some people are born on a high gear and they could do 4 podcasts before noon and feel good throughout the day. A lot of people are going to suffer though doing that. And some of what I would advise people just involves calibrating to say, all right, like do as much as you can, but don't burn out because that just makes things a whole lot worse.
Hmm. Now, coming from a psychology aspect, have you noticed, like, at least when it comes to, like, maybe not just society, but just people in general, are there people experiencing more problems from just the vast awareness that a lot of people have, especially when it comes to like social issues? But are you experiencing that it's getting a little bit easier if they're able to maintain it in like a certain way?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, thinking about Americans for a second, because it's not the same throughout the entire world. But if we look at the year by year measures of well-being, especially among young adults, we can see that it it feels like it's getting worse. And this trajectory, this upward increase in distress, whether it's something like feeling generalized anxiety or depression, or just a normative kind of malaise, difficulty concentrating, difficulty sleeping, however you want to slice it, seems to be getting worse. But that trend has been going on for the better part of the last century. There's something about modern life that we're not really able to cope with. And I think one way to address the question, does it seem to be worse now? I think the simple answer is yes, but I think it's kind of an oversimplification because I think this has been a problem for a really long time for us. And that's kind of related to what I was saying just a minute ago about how we were never really good at communicating, but we could be. And I see the same kind of potential for well being and happiness. I think we've never really been good at it. Is it more difficult now because of all the stuff we're aware of, all the problems that are happening that we're now paying attention to? Sure, maybe, but we can't ignore them. We can't ignore climate change because it makes us feel bad. We can't ignore democratic backsliding and war around the world because it gives us distress. We have to just think about ways to regulate our emotions and develop a sense of peace and well-being, which is really challenging but absolutely doable.
Yeah, well, it's also recognizing that as well too. I think we're really good at recognizing problems, but I think everyone's got their own idea of what problem and which way to get there without really communicating effectively on it. I just think we're exposed to a lot more than we've ever been to exposed to before. Like it's very easy to look up on your phone. Usually what's trending is like a Johnny Depp trial, a bomb went off or something like that. And I'm like, you're experiencing a lot in a very, very small space. And most people are doing this, like whether they're at a traffic light or while they're, at a break at their job and they come back from their lunch shift and they're just all ramped up and everyone's like, what's wrong? I spent the good part of all last night just watching YouTube videos of like amazing stories of like it started off like best moments of 2021 and 2022, where it's like people doing like insanely good skill stuff that makes you feel like crap all day. And then
Send that to me. I want to see it myself.
but this led into a person that was interviewing people with like severe disabilities, like they have their own syndromes named after them, and he was trying to highlight that these are just normal people as well too, which I think a lot of people wouldn't even question that. But the guy was asking questions to these people like, do you think that other people talk about your disabilities? It's like, why would you ask someone? That's the worst question you could ask somebody about something like that. Now it's his show, so he can run it how he wants, but eventually I'm like crying because I'm like looking at this, I'm like, what do I have to complain about? This person obviously has a whole different life, and it's difficult obviously for them, but it was something that I was aware to that I honestly wouldn't have even thought of if it wasn't for a device to really show me that. Now, did I go sorting that out? Was that an algorithm issue? I don't know. But I also think that's an issue. I can't control that. I can't fix that person with like God power or something like that, or give them, like full capabilities of their arms. But now it's a problem that I'm thinking about, and it had me all messed up where I didn't get any sleep last night.
Yeah, I think what you're describing is really common when we are learning about people's suffering and we feel, in a sense, kind of powerless, like we can't help them. And now we're stuck with this feeling of despair and knowing that there's this bad thing happening in the world, this person is suffering or these people are suffering, and I'd really love to be able to do something about it, but what can I do? I'm just one person and I have a job and responsibilities. And I think sometimes we underestimate how much power we have. And this is a message that I try to impart on my students, is that you really have tremendous power to change things for the better for those around you. And part of where this can happen effectively is in small communities. And when I say small, sometimes it's as small as just the people in your neighborhood and giving them a helping hand if they're going through a rough time. It can be slightly larger communities like you'd see on a campus at high school or college, university. And when you start to really create change on a local level, then I think it becomes empowering, and then people realize, oh, we can work together and we can do things and we can make life better for a lot of people. So I encourage people when they're feeling this way, I really want to do something, start small and see just how far you can take that.
I That's exactly how I literally feel about politics. Like everyone always is like wants you to put you in a side or put you in a category. I honestly am politically homeless. I thought I was libertarian. I thought I was so many things. And then it's like, no, I don't believe as much as these people believe in this because I don't see change that I can affect doing that. Now, other people might have differing views of like, you can affect so much if you just did this. I'm like, I honestly don't see that. But what things I can affect, there's a thing called Judge Rothenberg Education Center. It was shut down during the pandemic under like, nobody was really paying attention during the 2021 when it was all first kicking off, like peak COVID, but it's an educational center where they hold mentally challenged people and like let them stay there and teach them and educate them, but they still use electroconvulsive therapy, and they actually shocked a kid 114 times to where the kid has now developed acute stress disorder and third degree burns on the side of his forehead. Now I heard about that and I immediately start going, what? And the center is still like technically ongoing. It's still shut down because of COVID, but this is a real thing where I'm like, that's something I can affect change in. That's not like a giant institution. That's a small institution run by some corrupt people that luckily other people have sued and got it shut down. But saying it, I go, did you know this was happening in 2021 or 2022? People go, that's not real. Yeah, it is. And it's like, that's stuff that I can affect change. It's kind of like most people would use the example instead of that one, like an environmental thing, like recycling or something like that. But that's a real ethical concern that's happening right now and it's just not getting attention, and that's something you can reasonably affect change, and you don't have to worry like and feel like you're a failure if you're not, because you're still talking about it, you're still addressing something that you can change. If you're talking about the election saying and the election's rigged or the election's not rigged or this is a right wing, this is a left wing, you're not doing anything but shouting into a political void. It's like, for me, I just go, it's already set in stone of who's going to get office. Nobody wants this person. Nobody wants this person. Now, a large amount of people can affect change with a vote. Sure. But I'm saying is like, if it doesn't work out in your favor, you feel like you're the failure. And then you start taking more anger out. And I go, just affect something that you can make actual change with. And that could be driving someone to work who might need a ride. That could be something where you have physical full control. Besides the like election, for instance, raising a gas price or something like that, you're still going to your job. You're still doing work. You're still living your lifestyle like you kind of did before, maybe with some slight other adjustments to it, but you're still like nobody's stopping you from going to work. And I think a lot of people put their fate in something else. And I don't know why that is.
Right.
I said a
I
lot. I'm
want to.
sorry.
Yeah, no, that's all good there. I think. Yeah, I want to come back to what I was saying before about how schools can be a kind of laboratory for democracy, so to speak, and how at a young age all across our mainstream schools, we're kind of teaching young people to feel that sense of powerlessness. You're not in control. You're in a classroom that you didn't choose, with teachers that you didn't choose, learning topics that you didn't choose. And if you don't follow the rules, if you don't obey, then you're going to be punished either with grades that will affect future prospects, or something worse like, detention or suspension or expulsion. And that does breed a sense of powerlessness. And if you look at the theories of well-being in psychology, one of them being self-determination theory, one of the key aspects of this theory is that people really need a sense of competence or self-efficacy in order to thrive. What that means is that people need to feel like they're capable, that they can do things. And part of the consternation about social media plays on this, when you just described how people feel a certain way about politics and they're typing, or as you said, shouting into the void. It's not really productive, but it's a striving for that sense of self-efficacy. It's, I need to feel like I'm doing something, and I don't have a space to do that in my daily life. So I'm going to go on Twitter and write something, and now it feels like I'm active. It feels like I'm participating. Or I'm going to post something on Instagram, and now it feels like I'm contributing to this conversation. And I think my response to that would be, social media is not the problem. The problem is we're not giving people at a young age a space to do that in their lives. You've taken away all of their agency, and they feel helpless and powerless, so they're going to look for opportunities to get in the game, but those are not necessarily going to be productive. So my thing is advocating for democratizing education, to give people at a young age a sense of purpose and agency in their daily lives, to say, no, you can actually affect things. You can help set the rules for lunch and recess, and what books we're going to read, and how we're going to deal with rules and rule breakers. So all of that gives people a sense that they're actually building a community that matters to them. And then, of course, not just in school, but after we graduate, feeling like you are a part of your community, and going to community meetings wherever you live, and meeting your very local representatives and expressing your concerns to them, and speaking with others around you who might have different opinions and trying to understand them. And all of that is part of the community that we really need in order to feel well, in order to feel happy and satisfied with our lives, and also making a positive difference, even if it is small things.
Wouldn't that be dangerous though, to have kids suggest what things that they read? Like how many kids want to actually read like historical documents, or rather just read like Teen Titans Go or something like that?
So I remember my interest in reading history skyrocketed after I finished school. I
Yeah.
it could not stand history when I was in school, but as soon as I didn't have to do it for a grade, I was like, "Oh, this is cool. I want to learn a little bit more about the Cold War, or uh
JFK.
something." Yeah, exactly. And I think we tend to underestimate just how thirsty young people are to know things. This is how humans became the dominant species on the planet. We're born with curiosity. We're born with this incredible gift to want to understand the world around us. And school should just be a place where we're capitalizing on that, instead of operating from an inaccurate idea that kids won't do anything valuable unless we force them to do it. Nothing could be further from the truth. There would not be, we would not have been able to put people on the moon if the default for humans was that we don't want to do things that are valuable and important. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I always brought up a long time ago was if you gave a kid a census test, but instead of like the populations on it or something like that, you had classes to check off and then give them the classes that they would like. You're not going to have a kid with ADHD who can't sit still and can't do math or something like that learn anything, but he's interested in wood shop. So maybe you direct him to having those classes for wood shop or let him choose. Now, you do need to learn the basic fundamentals. I do agree. As much as I hated math and I hated all that stuff, I really did like reading, though. So it kind of gave me this avenue of like, oh, I'm going to do really good in my English classes. But then when I don't do good in my other classes, you give me an F and make me seem like I'm not going to amount to anything. I think that's a large portion with schools. But I also think instead of a kid or kids being able to make their own decisions when it comes to like class teachings, just have each kid be more personalized as well too. If a kid has a certain interest in Greek mythology, let them learn about Greek mythology, and then if another kid in that class likes mathematics, let them learn about mathematics.
Yeah, I'll put a plug for Scott Barry Kaufman. He has done a lot of really important work in this area in terms of things like reimagining what education could look like. And as you're describing, kind of tailoring the experience for individuals based on their interests and curiosities. And we can, of course, encourage people at a young age and nudge them toward the things we think are the most important, among them being the ability to read and write and do basic math. I would never suggest we should drop those topics. What makes me cringe a little bit is when people say, "Oh, you have to memorize the quadratic formula." And you know, if you don't do that, you'll fall behind. And now there's this whole discourse about learning loss during the pandemic. Kids are falling behind, and I'm
Wait,
like,
what?
"What the hell are you talking about?"
Wait, what?
Yeah,
Learning loss
this
during the pandemic?
yeah, learning loss has become this kind of buzzword in education now because schools were for a long time either shut down or their the classes were all online, and the logic was that students are falling behind where the benchmarks were from previous years. And my thinking on that has been, well, this is totally arbitrary. I mean, you're telling me that now teenagers know less trigonometry than teenagers 3 years ago. I don't really care about that. That's not an important benchmark for us to consider. But that is where the discourse is.
Well, who's used Pythagorean theorem out of high school or out of whenever they learned it? There's just some stuff where it's like it hasn't really updated. Like, I mean, I guess that depends on. I just feel like there hasn't been a whole lot of focus as much as they say on the education systems as well. I'm happy that they've changed their perspective on like ADHD. When I was a kid in school, they just considered you were mentally challenged and put you in a room. Now it's like we're gonna find a better like nutrition plan, or maybe it's something he's eating, or maybe a yoga or some type of recess. I'm like, that's awesome. Glad we're focusing on that. But at the same time, there's a lot of essential stuff that they're teaching you that's like what they deem as essential. It isn't essential. You're never probably going to use it when you get outside of school, but you learn it for that one class, and it might actually deter you from progressing in another field in a sense.
It's actually even worse than that.
Oh God.
So I'm gonna explain in just a second, but just to capitalize on that, and double click on school reform for a second. Sleep is so important for
Don't
basic
stop.
well-being,
Don't
and and if you have a school system where your teenagers, especially, I have to say it's more of a problem for them than it is for the really young ones, but at K through 12 it's a big problem in general. If you're sleep depriving them, they're not functioning, and they're not only they're not going to learn, but they're going to be miserable, and they're going to feel disempowered. So even when they say, "Oh, look, we did this study where we set the first period an hour later and look at all the wonderful benefits for the students," I say, "Yeah, great. Do it 2 hours later. Why not?" There's no need to have school start at 7:30 a.m., but that's just the way that we've done it. So schools think that it needs to continue that way. But just to also riff on the other thing that you said about what needs to be taught in school and what doesn't need to be taught, the reason that those things are emphasized in school more than other types of topics, it does have an effect. This is kind of the hidden curriculum of disempowering students to feel like their values are not being taken into account and their well-being is not being taken into account. I mean, I did pretty well in school as a student, and I still felt that way. Even as I was getting A's in my courses, I felt like this system is not something that is consistent with my values. And maybe one day it'll all make sense. Maybe I'll wake up in my, 20s or 30s and think, "Oh, so that's why they had me read A Midsummer Night's Dream. It all makes sense now." Like, but that day never came, and I don't think it ever will.
Me and Bob Strickgold, we talked about that. If you gave kids an hour to sleep in or something, but that's why everyone says that, like, oh, these kids are lazy. All they want to do is sleep all day. It's like, yeah, well, you have them on a time basis. That I get it. It's like responsibility, I guess, is their whole method of trying to understand that. But it just doesn't make sense because you would have more effective learning production if you just like. It's the same reason, like during the pandemic, people were upset that their kids are going to have to online learn. I was like, you can have both. You can have some people that want to show up to school and some people that don't feel comfortable not show up as well too. You'll probably get more learning done if you let each kid work at their own pace and then just give a test and hopefully they complete all their work at the end of the year. You put that kid in reliance and their responsibilities instead of waking up at certain times, but to do their work and it'll show. Some kids will succeed and some kids won't do as well, but that's not your teacher's fault. You set the course, you set the pace and have them work. It's like doing online classes. You have these assignments you have to turn in. For me, I know I'm not going to do it the rest of the week. So do it all on the first day, then as soon as it comes out. Um, but it's just, I think it's because it's also like you were mentioning a minute ago about like you expect like the kids, for instance, that they don't have any power. Well, it's just the way that we view I would say wisdom and the way that we view intelligence happens to be on an age case. For instance, if I said something very, very profound or something like philosophy, whatever philosopher stoic, whatever you want to say the word is, but if I said something really, really like great, and it wouldn't really be taken to the same effect as if someone who's older said it because of the age. The way we experience intelligence and the way that we seek out wisdom happens to come from like the saying of like respect your elders or there's wisdom in years. That's kind of how we view things. And it's not necessarily true. I've met a 12-year-old that says some shit where I'm like, are you Gandhi? Like it's profound and it makes you stop. And I think it's very, very hard for people of an older age to listen to someone who's younger because of the fact of there is that, I guess, understanding that you can only seek something of value if it comes from someone older than yourself or someone in a respectable thing. And I'm like, well, what are we deeming the value of the words being spoken? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Yeah, that's how intelligence was first conceptualized in terms of chronological age. And I mean, now we still have those standardized tests for intelligence, but we tend to not rely on them as much as we do other examinations like the SAT or the GRE for grad school. But the the thinking is similar. You're scoring people in a sense, not just based on what they're producing, but based on where they are in years. And that's probably not very wise. It's
Yeah.
probably better to let people progress at their own pace. And if they get to the same point, but it takes them an extra year, so what? That shouldn't be a problem.
Do you think that people during like the pandemic, for instance, do you think that they actually more kids who didn't have the ability to learn actually seeked out more of their own personal? Like I found that since the podcast, talking to so many people, I reach out to people I'm interested in learning and seeing perspective from. I never did that in school. I never seek to learn anything, but I've learned more than this on this show than I have doing, the 15 years of school and then the college as well.
The pandemic has been very tricky, and I think a lot of people when they talk, oh, this is what the pandemic has done to us, this is what life is like now, and there's a tendency to want to make a one size fits all prescription here. But the truth is that if you look at the data on things like learning and general feeling well, feeling happy, the people who were not doing very well before the pandemic have done better. The people who have been doing very well before the pandemic are doing worse. And I see this a lot from my students. Some of them will be emphatic that the pandemic really helped them because if they're taking courses online, it means they have more flexibility with their schedule. They have a shorter commute. They, especially for the students with disabilities, they don't have to hop around everywhere to get to their physical classrooms. It's much easier for them and they're happier. And then I get other students who are saying, this was a huge disruption. I'm really suffering. I can't keep on track with my online classes. I need to go back to the way it was before. So, my thing about how we go forward into the future in the wake of the pandemic is just to realize that people have different needs and try to construct systems that work for the most amount of people instead of making it a cookie cutter. You have to fit in this box in order to succeed, which is what we had been doing before. So, what does that mean? It means we're going to need a lot of hybrid approaches. And I think you're starting to see that. You're starting to see workplaces tell people, all right, you don't have to come in every day like in 2019. You can come in a couple of days a week, or you can work fully from home if you're going to be just as productive. That's fine. We can use the same approach for school. We can say, look, if you feel like you can do this effectively, whether it's coursework, independent study, that kind of thing, will give you the space that you need to do well in this area. But most schools, I think, are dragging their feet on that. They're starting to think about ways we can get back to 2019, get everyone back in the classrooms just as we were before. We're going to fill up the lecture halls. Everything is going to be the way it was. And I don't think that's very wise. I think a lot of students are expressing a different kind of need, and we need to be receptive to that.
I was pro people like working from home because obviously you can spend more time with your kids as well too if you didn't have to go to your job. But the only issue that I saw was that it's hard to then separate your home from your work, and a lot of people were having issues with that even with sleep. I had Alex Dimitru on here who was speaking about that work and kind of relationship that he was seeing with some of the people because he's a psychologist, a sleep psychologist. So he was talking about people couldn't separate that distinctive aspect of this is your home, this is when you sleep, but people felt like, oh, now work can just call me whenever and ask me to hop on this thing. And it's like, yeah, before you used to, and I guess you can understand like if you go to work there is some type of office banter that does provoke good ideas and good work at times, but I think it's the hybrid approach that you're talking about. If you had like, if you don't feel like working at home today, maybe go into the office 1 or 2 days a week so you can get that separation, that disconnect. I think it's just our routines though. We try and establish not only ourselves and our identity of what we believe in and what we physically understand, we identify ourselves with our routines. And when our routines get thrown out of shape, we're out of balance. So we're trying to find a new balance. And necessarily, is that balance better, or is it just getting used to that new experience to where it feels normal? Like that idea of the new normal. I'm like, life isn't normal. Like you have to understand that, like these words, new normal, they're just words, and it's like brainwashing. It's making you think that there's a way to get back to where it was, like you were saying, back to 2019. I'm like, it could adjust at any time. It wasn't a certain time period where you just saw the whole graph go to shit. Maybe economically, sure, we can say that, but your own personal lifestyle, there's no time machine that's invented that takes you back to some certain point where all your problems are gone. You're just not remembering all your problems.
Yeah, totally. And I think when people feel stressed out, and there's been a lot of distress
Yeah.
in recent years, they tend to gravitate more towards routines, like you're saying, because routines are comfortable and familiar. It's like when you're a kid and you have your favorite stuffed animal and it kind of comforts you a little bit. Adults are like that too. We gravitate towards the same TV shows on Netflix that we've always seen that episode 100 times. But if you're feeling stressed, it's like you go back to that comfortable, familiar place. And so the routine for people serves that purpose. I just wish we would be a little bit more intentional about it. So when we're going back to offices now over the past year, as we've been seeing, to think about, okay, well, what is the purpose of this? What are we hoping to achieve here? What are we hoping to gain from these in-person interactions? And if we're not thinking along those lines, but we're just thinking, oh, well, this is the way we've always done it, that's not good. And it's not that it's it's not good in the sense that it's not good for us mentally, but it's also not good for society if we're just kind of going through the motions without really thinking about it. I mean, I remember looking at data on pollution from 2020 when we all went into lockdowns all over the world and greenhouse gas emissions plummeted, but then they quickly went back to where they were before. Well, that shouldn't be. I mean, surely we can capitalize on some of the silver linings. I wrote a post for Psych Today last year about this, saying there's some silver linings. It's been a dark time over the past couple of years, but there's some things that we can and should preserve. I mean, we virtually eliminated the regular influenza flu during the pandemic. We don't have to have a society where tens of thousands of people die every year from the regular flu. Surely we can keep the things that are worth preserving. And I guess I just wish we would have more of a mindset of trying to extract all the good stuff out of the bad stuff. It's kind of like there's a Buddhist way of thinking about the lotus growing from the mud. I think Thich Nhat Hanh said something to that effect. No mud, no lotus. And we can think about that process of trying to extract the beautiful flowers from the dirt, so to speak, in all areas of our lives.
So is it a problem with resilience or a problem with adaptability?
Um, Maybe both. You know, I really like this idea that John Haidt and Greg Lukianoff coined in the Coddling of the American Mind. They talked about anti-fragility, which is actually a term used by someone else, I think Nassim Taleb, but he was talking about it more in terms of financial systems, and Haidt and Lukianoff were talking about it more in terms of human resilience, like you're suggesting. And anti-fragility is this idea that we actually benefit from adversity. It's not just that. Like resilience is like if you drop something on the ground like a dodgeball and it bounces right back and it maintains its shape. And anti-fragility is different. Anti-fragility would be like if the dodgeball somehow became stronger and better after you drop it on the floor and it bounces back. So humans are like that, and our immune systems are like that. When we get exposed to a virus like the flu, our body builds an immune response and then is healthier and better able to fight off the illness the next time the body sees it. That's why vaccines work, because you're programming the body with information that it didn't have before, assuming that you survive. And of course, not everyone does survive. But that's the theory, is that we can benefit from stress and adversity. Part of the way in which we do that is by simply recognizing that there is a benefit to be had. So this is why optimists tend to thrive, because they tend to look for good things even in any type of situation, even if it's a negative situation. And so they're better able to capitalize on those experiences and become healthier and stronger in the long run.
Well, also, I think it's if you're a pessimist and you look at the only problems of a bad situation or the problems in a situation, it's not a happy life, but you also never let go. There's a not a, like when I talk about resilience, I talk about there's a lot of people that just don't bounce back. There's a lot of people that just hold on to one thing and let it completely ruin their life. I bet you, me and you both could name a person that's still holding back something from high school or from grade school where it's like, remember that touchdown I did? I was like, that was fucking Pee Wee, man. That was Pee Wee. Like it's so long ago and they're like in their 30s. But people don't get out of those mindsets. I don't know if it's an emotional stunt, but also our adaptability as well too. We expect life to go exactly like how our routines go, or exactly how we think that we're going to plan the day to go. You plan to go to the beach, it rains the next day, it's not, you're not going to the beach now. You should expect problems happening in your life. I mean, the fact that we can wake up and go to our jobs, I mean, what about our lungs just not working or our hearts just stop beating? Like there's these things that we totally completely forget about. And it's like you should expect that there is going to be a problem. At least you could brace for it. Doesn't mean being a pessimist, but it just knows that like, yeah, there's a chance that could happen, but I'm not going to let it get me down. I'm not going to sit there and be like, this just ruined my whole day. And there's not a lot of that. There's a lot of people that, they see one thing on social media, they see one thing that they don't agree with, and they want to spend their whole rest of their day debating back and forth. And I'm like, yo, it's 3 a.m. and this guy's still debating this person on something stupid.
Yeah, yeah, totally. And there's a lot of good tools out there for people to learn these healthy cognitive strategies. And I'll put another plug in for the Feeling Good Handbook. This is David Burns's big work that gives people tools like understanding cognitive distortions and learning that not every bump in the road has to be a disaster.
When it comes to sleep, for instance, because I did come across you from your sleep, you wrote something about pandemics and dreams. Did you? I always thought like sleep, like I'm an insomniac, so like it's just me not burning off enough energy. I just 30 minutes of sleep, I'm good to go. But when it comes to dreams, my dreams are so intense in that 30 minutes of sleep or something where it feels like I've been asleep for 8 years. The dream just lasts forever. I don't know what a lot of them mean. They're all really, really far out there, like a bad acid trip. But also, there's like something like a recognition, I feel like, of like dreams really showing people things that they're neglecting to focus on. Like either if it's in their subconscious or if it's just something like you have a dream about, I don't know, flying through space. Now you can write a dream journal and then look it up and see it tells you, oh, it just means you're looking for inner peace. I don't necessarily believe that, but if you have a dream that you're stuck in high school and you're about to fail a test, I think everyone's had that experience or something like that where they have this overwhelming anxiety and they wake up and they go, "Oh my god." And you're like, "Wait a minute. I've been out of high school for 15 years now." Like there's just this like
Yeah,
I don't know what that is.
yeah. So with regards to the high school anxiety dreams specifically, those are actually quite common, and that's another disturbing aspect of what we're doing to kids and teenagers in school is that decades later they're still having these anxiety dreams. I heard a couple of my academic colleagues on a podcast recently talking about that. They were like, "You still get those?" Yeah. Yeah, now I get it where I'm teaching the class and I haven't prepared everything, but it's the same kind of feeling where you're about to fail. So I think you're right to suggest that if you have a specific type of dream where you're flying in outer space, it doesn't have a specific meaning attached to it. And at the same time, your dreams could be trying to alert you to something that needs paying attention to. I remember saying at the beginning of the pandemic, if we're in isolation and we start feeling like we're having these intense, vivid dreams, it's because we're trying to cope with this new reality, this new world we are finding ourselves in. And that can take many different forms. It could be coping with physical changes, it could be coping with social changes. And so your dreams are going to reflect a whole lot of different types of stuff that we're kind of working through. For me personally, I was having a lot of dreams about old friends of mine from far away. And it felt like what I was experiencing was my mind saying, don't forget about these folks. They're really important to you. Get in touch with them and see how they're doing. And hopefully you'll be able to see them again soon.
Hmm. I always consider it like the fact of like future tripping. It's like the opposite. A lot of times your brain goes through like old memories or like things that you did, and then it just tries to analyze and pick them apart. And I kind of relate it to like, I feel like you need conflict in your everyday life. And if you don't have conflict, either a small little conflict, you search for it somewhere else, which is like during the time when Jersey Shore first came out, I would have like days at school where I would be like, this was boring and I don't know why, because there was no problems. There was no issue with tests. There was none of that. And then I came home and I would watch Jersey Shore and just want to stick a fork in my eye. And I'm like, I feel like this is the same thing. Like we just look for conflict. And when we don't have conflict, even in our dreams, we'll try and pick apart something. Just, I don't know if it's like trying to make yourself feel bad. I don't think that's it. But I also think it's a way of like, it's like a backwards way of assessing danger. Like we know it's past, so there's no danger in it, but we're looking for all the things that we end up thinking about later, and then it becomes a danger in our head.
Right, right. Right. Well, there's a couple of things going on here. And when it comes to things like normative, everyday conflict, like not intense violence, not like war, but just like you're describing, a kind of interpersonal drama that might happen throughout your day, that can be very beneficial, especially in the context of friendships, because we're challenging each other. It's like sports. It's kind of like rough and tumble play. If you watch animals, especially young ones, they're playing with each other. They're rehearsing, essentially. They're practicing for navigating through the physical world when they grow up, either hunting or evading predators, things like that. And with humans, it's kind of the same thing. We have art and music and sports, all these various ways in which we exercise our creativity. And sometimes it can involve conflict, but it's a good conflict. And if, if you're playing sports with friends of yours and you're knocking each other around a little bit, you leave it on the court and you go and live your lives with a lot of love and compassion and intimacy with the community of friends that you have. The conflict that you have as part of the game, that's part of it. It's not a separate thing. It's not something to be avoided. I think people in America, especially, tend to avoid conflicts. And then we go to watch episodes of reality TV, like you said, which are not necessarily something we would always enjoy. You mentioned wanting to stick a fork in your eye. It's like there's something about the conflict that we're drawn to because we do sometimes need it. But it would probably be healthier for us if we were just a little bit more honest, maybe a little bit even more abrupt or blunt with each other during our daily lives. I think other cultures tend to do that much better. Americans struggle with it. I'm not really sure why. We love to be polite and keep things below the surface, but what we're really doing is being dishonest.
Well, we used to have deeper connections with people to where we could have that discourse. Now we don't really have those deep connections anymore. Like if you have a close friend, for instance, back in the day, you used to be able to talk to your close friend and they used to sit you down and be like, yeah, man, it sucks, but we're going to get through this. But like now you have this aspect of people venting through social media or something like that, where you put up a post and it gets 7 likes, it gets 8 likes or something like that. But then you put up the post the next day, and then the next day you get 5 likes, and then each day it's declined by a like. And then on that Sunday, you post a thing, nobody likes it. You're like, do people still care about me? Do I still have this like love of everybody that's following me or checking my admiration? I think it's just the way we've just used our sense of empathy, or maybe the sense of like connection. We try and form it with social media, not just social media being bad. Like, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that we've just invested a lot into something where I go, you need to invest it in more physical aspects of your life too. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you can build up your metaverse character, but is that going to reflect on you? I have no clue.
Yeah, and this is one of those areas where I would say if we in our society can look at other cultures and ask ourselves, well, they seem to have figured out a way to do really genuine, honest communication and have those good connections with each other. What can we learn from them? And sometimes that just involves talking to people who live in other places and understanding how they do things. But with regards to social media, you can look at the way other people do it and see if we can model good behavior. And sometimes that means operating with good faith. Sometimes it means remembering that not everyone is going to like all of your posts. And I have that happen to me where, just as you described, one day I'll get 25 likes or something like that. And then the next day, zero. And you have to just remember that you're not going to have days. I mean, you're gonna have days when no one likes what you have to say, but that might be more honest and genuine than everyone saying yes, yes, I love your stuff all the time, because they may not really feel that way.
How do you feel about isolation being like a good power tool?
Can you say a little bit more? Physical isolation? What do you mean
Like,
by that?
just isolation, maybe social isolation. I find that, like, like, for like, there's always a tarot card called being like a hermit. Now, I'm not saying tarot's like a science to go by. I'm just saying, but there's that card because a lot of people who are loners, for instance, you can learn more from your thoughts. And isolation, for instance, some very, very like intelligent people, for instance, have talked about how they spend a lot of time in isolation. Writers, for instance, do the same exact thing when they write a book or something. They put themselves in isolation. I feel like if you are able to bounce off your own thoughts and deal with your own kind of persona in a sense, which is sometimes the hardest thing to do. Not saying that people don't initially like themselves, but it is a difficult challenge to just be alone. Um, do you feel like that's a good tool that maybe there should be periods of like that? Like that's an importance of doing online schooling as well too. Not only are you in a class, but you also have this social isolation aspect as well too.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. I think that can be good in small doses. Like I went through something similar to what you're describing when I was writing my dissertation, and I just kind of hid away for about a month and just wrote a lot because I had to get that done, and it felt great. It felt like I was free of all the usual distractions, and I could just focus on my work and devote myself to it. And then it was done, and I, came out of my relative isolation and started doing more social things again. So I think there's something to that. I think it extremes, if like you're alluding to the hermit, the person who is never around other people, that's probably not good. But sometimes we need to check out for a little bit and be by ourselves and reflect and meditate and try to, like you said, bounce ideas off ourselves and see how they feel. But probably not for extended periods of time.
Yeah, you go crazy if you're all by yourself for like months and months on end. But like a bear in hibernation. Uh, Dylan, it's been a pleasure chatting with you, man. Is there a place where people can find your website and also your podcast as well too?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks. It's been a pleasure talking with you. And my website is dylanselterman.com. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at seltermosby. And like I said, my Psychology Today blog is called The Resistance Hypothesis, and my podcast is called A Bit More Complicated. You can find us on Twitter at A Bit More Pod.
I'll make sure to link it all in the description. Thanks for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank Podcast.